Okay, so there's an interesting theory to the stuff that I've been talking about for quite some time when it comes to Final Fantasy and how they made a massive, huge mistake, in my opinion, when it comes to how they handled the mainline franchise in the Switch 1 era. I felt that they did not do enough to court in new gamers and to put out their flagship franchise on the most popular system in Japan and worldwide, to be honest here. And I felt that it would have a ripple effect. And one of the reasons why that Square Enix has completely about-faced and said, okay, we need to make sure that we put out Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and all of our biggest franchises multi-platform, and especially having it on Nintendo systems in order to court as big and as good of an audience as we can. Now, before then, those are just theories that I had talking about it and how it could be detrimental to the future because of the sales numbers of games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Final Fantasy XVI. But now we actually have a bit of data that backs up what I've been saying about the popularity of it going forward, because there was an interesting interview series that talked to various kids about what they actually play and the time between the big releases. So I think it's a little bit twofold. It's taking forever at this point to get new games out on these systems because the development periods are so long. And also, two, you're not releasing on the platform that actually has a pretty wide range of people playing, from younger children all the way up to old people. But before we continue on, we are giving away a Nintendo Switch 2. All you have to do to enter is hit that subscribe button if you aren't already subscribed, and drop a comment below. We are giving away a Nintendo Switch 2 once we hit 150,000 subscribers, and it will be random. So the more that you actually comment and interact, the better chance that you have to win. Hit that like button, click that notification bell, and let's go ahead and jump right back into it. Let's get into what was said here in this recent interview and theory/test. So shout outs to Stealth for rounding up the information, and this is from Automation as well. So Stealth says, it's an interesting theory that kids in Japan are more attached to Pokemon than Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest due to the frequency of releases. In the past, you might see multiple sequels on a single system. Now it feels like that's less common. The interviewer says Dragon Quest has been getting a lot of attention lately with all the remakes. It may be overtaking Final Fantasy in terms of popularity. Come to think of it, which franchise does the younger crowd prefer, Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy? I'll ask them. So youngster A said Pokemon, youngster B said Pokemon, youngster C said Pokemon, youngster D said Pokemon. I've never played Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy. And then the interview was like, ... like, wow, that's interesting. So Stealth also adds this in, which is something that kind of plays into what I talked about. Dev times aren't the only issue. Main Final Fantasy games in particular haven't launched on the most popular platform in Japan in quite a long time. Switch was the most popular platform in Japan for 8 years. Before that, the 3DS was. Pokemon is available to more players. And this is 100% correct. If you look at what Nintendo did with the Switch 1, the fact that there was no big mainline Final Fantasy game built specifically for that system with a separate team or something was a huge issue that I called from the very beginning would be a bad idea from Square Enix to not get something done. Before that, the Nintendo 3DS. Square Enix never truly took the Nintendo 3DS seriously. There was some stuff here and there, but they did not put out big mainline type of titles, or even stuff like Final Fantasy like Type O that they put out on PSP or Vita, or some of the other big games that they tried to put out on PlayStation when Sony had a handheld device. So to me, I felt that they really messed up in that type of way. And it goes once again with what I've been saying, that Square Enix absolutely made a big mistake here, not getting out mainline Final Fantasy on some of the more popular systems in Japan. Pokemon has also done a number of other things. You have the anime, you have the cards, you have all the different merchandising that they do. It just is a machine that's hard to stop. It just keeps going with all the different stuff that Pokemon has. Final Fantasy does not have that. I also think that the decline of PlayStation in Japan in particular is a huge problem with that, because the issue is that as many kids are not buying PlayStation as they used to buy. So if they're not buying PlayStation, they're not growing up with that in Japan at least. So therefore that creates another big problem. So Square Enix is trying to rectify that at this point. They've got Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade that launched recently on the Nintendo Switch 2. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is coming out this June as well. So they are picking things up and catching up for the lost time here. Plus, it does seem like Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 will launch multi-platform, not just on PlayStation, then a year or years later on Xbox and Nintendo Switch 2, so Square Enix does know what they need to do. And even with Dragon Quest VII Reimagined, they revealed that for the first time, announcing it at a Nintendo Direct. So they're taking what Nintendo's doing a bit more seriously, in my opinion, and don't be surprised if going forward we do get some type of main big Final Fantasy game announced at a Nintendo Direct, or something happening with the Nintendo Switch 2 specifically because of the situation with the Switch 2 in Japan and Square Enix absolutely wanting to be part of people's childhoods. Because if you look at the original Final Fantasy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all of those games, people grew up with those games. A lot of those games were some people's first RPGs. Kids played Final Fantasy all the time. Back when I was a kid, Final Fantasy was huge. Yes, adults played it too, but Final Fantasy was a game that you played as a kid and you played into your adulthood. You started with Final Fantasy 6, or you started with Final Fantasy 1 or 2 or whatever it was, and then you played Final Fantasy 7, and then you played 8, and as you got older and older, you played the Final Fantasy games. Kids are absolutely not doing the same thing that I did. Final Fantasy is not one of those games. Pokemon is one of those games where you play as a kid and then some people stop playing, but a lot of people keep playing, and then new kids just keep on replacing the old kids. So that's the funny thing with Pokemon, and that's the thing that Pokemon's been very successful with, is making sure that they get new people to be able to play. But yes, having it available on the Nintendo 3DS and on the Nintendo Switch 1, so you can pretty much capture a whole childhood to teen to adults. I think that makes sense. And if you're constantly releasing games, then it becomes something to where people grew up with it and can enjoy the medium for a lifetime. I've been playing Pokemon games for decades now. So we'll see what Square Enix does with this going forward and how some of these other companies respond. But I would say for Japanese companies, the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be absolutely essential in capturing all the different types of people they want to capture for a lifetime of playing their games. So what do you guys think? You can let me know in the comment section below. But now we are going to move over to the next topic here, and that's going to be Nintendo sending big DMCA notices to pretty much every single Switch emulator and fork. And this is not my expertise, guys. I don't really know too much about the whole scene when it comes to emulation and the laws and all that stuff. So you can't come to me for stuff like that because I'm not really knowledgeable about everything. But it does seem like the Nintendo ninjas are working overtime at this point to completely shut down what is going on. And here's the thing, Android Authority is reporting that the Kyoto-based company has sent down takedown notices to Eden, Citron, Kenji NX, Mellow NX, as well as projects that are no longer active, such as Sudachi and Skyline. The reports that Citron and Eden have duplicated their repositories and hosted them on private servers, meaning that their existence is going to be hard to eradicate. So Nintendo's going after them. They constantly try to move it some other places and make it even more hidden. And I think that one of the big problems, I guess, for people who are the pro emulation or whatever it was, is that people were talking about it way too much. People were tagging people on Twitter, tagging Nintendo on Twitter, showing them that they're playing Tears of the Kingdom super early and bragging about it and everything. And I think that while Nintendo was obviously going to go after this stuff, the fact that people were so brash and people were so upfront about it and constantly taunting and saying, haha, I can play every single thing and all that. I think that made Nintendo say, all right, we're really going to dedicate a lot of manpower and resources to shutting this down. And I think that went into some of the core aspects of how they built the Nintendo Switch 2. One of the things that I heard people say online with the Switch 2 is that it's going to be hacked day one. It's not going to take too long. We're going to be able to emulate, you know, all the different games that are coming out. We're going to be able to play Donkey Kong, and we're going to be able to play Mario Kart World and all these titles before you know it. And now we're going on 8 months or so afterwards, and there's been nothing. There has been nothing really significant with the emulation scene and the Nintendo Switch 2. So I do think that it's probably not the end of it. I think at some point somebody will find some way to emulate Nintendo Switch 2 or do something to where people can do it, but I don't think it's going to be easy at all, and I think that it's going to get harder and harder for these emulators to really operate, especially how Nintendo is going after them. So it is what it is on that. So what do you guys think? You can let me know in the comment section below. All right, for the next topic, we're going to discuss Resident Evil, and not Resident Evil Requiem. We're going to discuss the roadmap from prominent leaker Dusk Golem, who gets a lot of stuff right about Capcom, and he's stating that Resident Evil 10, not Resident Evil 9 or Requiem as it's called, he's talking about Resident Evil 10 is currently aiming for a 2029 release. Now, we talked about Square Enix and not putting out games on Nintendo systems and the biggest mainline Final Fantasies and things like that, and not having it frequently enough. I think Capcom's realized this, even though they're making a mature franchise. They know that kids play Resident Evil, but Capcom always tries to have Resident Evil out and like a big remake or something very quickly. They do not want to miss too many years in a row, because I do think that Capcom realizes that they do also have to have constant releases in order to keep their biggest franchise, which is Monster Hunter, but also Resident Evil. Resident Evil can be also looked at as one of their biggest, if not biggest franchises, just considering the totality of the series. They want to make sure that people are constantly playing, thinking, and enjoying Resident Evil. So it does seem like Dusk Golem is saying here that Resident Evil 10 is currently aiming for a 2029 release. So in about 3 years, we're going to get the next big Resident Evil game. So here is the roadmap according to him. 2026, we got Resident Evil Requiem and the DLC for the game, which the DLC is not announced yet, but I mean, it's Resident Evil. You know it's going to happen. So that's awesome. Plus we have Resident Evil 7 and 8 on the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, 2027, that's going to be Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake, which has been reported by Nate the Hate and Dusk Golem. It does seem like that is happening. 2028, and that is going to be Resident Evil 0 Remake. Now, Resident Evil 0, that was originally a GameCube game, and it's pretty good for the most part. So I do think that Resident Evil Code Veronica for 2027 and Resident Evil Remake for 2028, both of those are really good calls. Now, in 2029, that's when Resident Evil 10 and maybe DLC happens. So this all makes complete sense. If Capcom was to do something like this, it makes complete sense that they would have this type of roadmap, because you get Resident Evil Requiem at this point. Everyone's excited for that game. Apparently the pre-orders and all that are really good for it, which makes sense. Capcom's been showing it off. People have been wanting it. It looks great. I can't wait. It's going to be on multiple platforms. I'm going to have a blast. I'm getting it on PS5. I'm getting the Generation Pack on the Nintendo Switch 2. So awesome stuff there. But Resident Evil Code Veronica, once again, another underutilized game over the years from Capcom. That needs to happen, which it does seem like that's happening. Resident Evil 0, once again, another very good pick. And then you're right back to making the big Resident Evil. And I think that Capcom has, I would say, had a lot of efficiency in their RE engine. You have that nice engine, the graphics look good, the game can be developed in a streamlined way. It doesn't seem like they have to really fight the engine or work super hard to get quality out of it. It supports lower end power systems like the Nintendo Switch 2 with pretty good results, all the way up to the highest end of a PlayStation 5 Pro or PC, a high-end PC. So everything seems to be correct and in line. And I think that Capcom can lower the development costs and the difficulty of making games and also make maximum profit in the process with $70 games starting out and DLC going through. So Capcom is onto something here, and they've been able to do something that a lot of other Japanese companies absolutely strive for when it comes to a mature IP like Resident Evil. So this is all very good stuff from Dust Golem if it turns out to be correct. Dust Golem's been pretty good with his information, so I'd pretty much say at this point that this is probably going to happen, especially since Nate the Hate has also stated that Resident Evil Code Veronica is also a thing. So what do you guys think when it comes to everything that we talked about here? A lot of stuff with Pokemon, Final Fantasy, and all of that, and what's happening when it comes to kids and what they're playing and growing up. Also, Nintendo's Emulator, Crusade, when it comes to taking those down, and Resident Evil and Capcom and what they have when it comes to games. Let me know in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other Nintendo Switch 2 RPG content and more right here on screen. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.